Good day and welcome back to The Shed. Today we go back to 1965 and we'll take a look at the Hugo award-winning novel for that year by Fritz Leiber, The Wanderer. So what I would like to do, as always, is provide a spoiler-free plot overview. I'll talk to what I liked, what I didn't like. I'll make some recommendations. I'll put this one to the memory test and we'll rank it on our ever-growing sci-fi share ladder, where I've been ranking all the Hugo and Nebula award-winning novels. So the novel is written in a near future from 1964, from when this novel was written. And what happens is that there's this planet the size of the moon that takes orbit around the Earth next to the moon, and this has sort of major catastrophic events take place on the planet Earth. And astrologers are sort of confused. They're sort of seeing this thing materialize out of nowhere, and they soon surmise that it must be coming from some kind of hyperspace. Anyway, the moon is utterly destroyed and consumed by this planet, which brings on some, apocalyptic events on the planet. So we have huge tidal waves, huge tides, volcanic eruptions, major earthquakes, and the Earth is pretty much destroyed almost because of this new planet taking orbit. And we learn of these events through the eyes of different characters within the novel. So there's quite a pretty big cast in this novel, from the UK, Europe, in the middle of the ocean, as well as the US. So we learn about all the catastrophic events that are taking place on Earth through the eyes of all these characters. But the main protagonists seem to be a trio of a lady called Margot, her boyfriend Paul, and this other guy called Donald. And these three have a sort of an interesting love triangle going on. And what we learned is that Paul is taken up into this spaceship which has come from this new planet taking orbit around the Earth. And as Paul sort of starts to realize his surroundings, he comes into contact with this alien being that looks like they evolved from some kind of cat creature. And what's rather interesting is that Paul is taken up with his pet cow, Meow. Pet cow? I meant to say his pet cat called Meow. So he's taken up into this flying saucer. And what's rather humorous is that Tigerishka, which is the alien being on this planet, sort of assumes that the cat is the intelligent life form, which has her and Paul in immediate conflict. So as Paul is on this planet orbiting the Earth with Tigerishka, this alien who seems to be evolved from some kind of tiger, he learns about the inhabitants of this planet, and they've got a rather interesting story to tell. Look, and this was a pretty fascinating novel. So in the end, we really see this apocalyptic event through the eyes of multiple different viewpoints. We have Paul, Donald, and his girlfriend Margot, really the crux of it all, trying to understand what is this planet, why are they here, what do they want from us. They also seem to be trying to help at the same time as causing all this grief, and all is revealed in this rather interesting 318-page novel. So what is there to like in Fritz Leiber's Wanderer? Look, for me, this was an interesting post-apocalyptic type novel, right? And I sort of enjoyed the theme in the sense that it didn't take it too seriously. It was a bit satirical at times and a bit of light-hearted humor as well. It was sort of reminiscent of those original series Star Trek episodes, if you know what I mean. It sort of had, like, is it serious? Is it satirical? Is it just bit of light-hearted humor? What is it exactly that I'm reading? And that was sort of the main takeaway I took from this one, and I've got to say I did enjoy that. The other thing that I enjoyed is that concept of Rama. For those of you who have read Rendezvous with Rama by Arthur C. Clarke, I mean, this is that kind of novel, right, where you have this alien artifact, this planet, this something coming to our orbit, and we're trying to make sense of what it is and why it's here, and all the damage that it could cause or has caused in this particular novel. And I like that concept. I do like books like Spin and Rendezvous with Rama, which we may talk to when it comes to some of the recommendations. But needless to say, I did like that concept, right? I've always enjoyed these novels that have the first contact in a way that we don't really necessarily expect. So that was a really another highlight for me in this one as well. Now, I've mentioned in the past that sometimes when you read these vintage science fiction novels, you've sort of got to look at the times in which they were written, because sometimes they give you that little bit of social commentary to make sense of what's really happening in this novel. And I don't want to talk too much to it because there'll be some spoilers if I do, but what I would like to say is that I definitely enjoyed the social and political commentary in this one that I thought was really interesting and quite refreshing as well. So what is there not to like in Fritz Leiber's The Wanderer? Look, for me, I'd have to say that this one hasn't aged well. I mean, there are some pretty dire sexist and racist remarks that are sort of just dropped on you, and honestly they sort of jump out of the page. You're not expecting them, and I don't mean to say that I believe Fritz Leiber was racist or sexist. I just mean it hasn't dated well, and I think some of the language that is used in this novel may have been acceptable back in 1965 when this novel won the Hugo, but it's definitely not something that our eyes are accustomed to seeing in print these days. So I'd have to say, if some of those words offend you, I'd say, you know, you might want to give this one a skip. But I do want to stress, I don't think Fritz Leiber was intentionally trying to be racist or sexist. It's just a sign of the times. So look, if that sort of offends you, I'd say, you know, be careful. Maybe read a couple of reviews where there are some spoilers so you can make your own decision on that. The other thing I would say, and I do understand why Fritz Leiber did it, is that I just think it had way too many characters in this one. Sometimes it was difficult trying to understand who's who and what do that bring to the plot. What's the significance of these characters? And I'd have to say that some of them absolutely brought nothing at all to the table, and all that through was really some social commentary, maybe around the jog culture. Maybe I'll say that as I'm thinking out loud about that, but yeah, I think there were just way too many characters that sometimes was difficult to piece it all together. The other thing that I would have to say that will lead straight into the memory test is that just, you know, the alien characters in this one I can't describe in any other way but cheesy. I mean, to have a female alien that looks like a cat that is called Tigerishka, I don't know, that just comes across as cheesy for me. But I'd have to say this about Tigerishka when it comes to the memory test, is that she held the test of time brilliantly. I must have read this book well over 20 years ago, the first time I read it, and as I was reading through it, I was thinking, oh yeah, I remember this about that moon coming into the orbit. But as soon as, you know, Tigerishka was introduced into the plot, I automatically remembered her. So that says something about these cheesy characters, I guess, is that they are memorable, and she was an enjoyable character. I actually did really like the interaction that Tigerishka had with Paul when they were on a spaceship. But yeah, look, I'd have to say it was a bit cheesy, and I don't know, maybe it should be talked to as a plus because she was definitely memorable. So look, a pretty interesting novel. I'd say definitely have a go at it. I thought I really enjoyed it, and I'm glad that I revisited this one something like 20 years after my initial reading. But similar books that you may have enjoyed in the past that we've covered on the Sci-Fi Shed Ladder that may give you a feel as to whether or not this one's for you. We're going to start with a different one, and I'll come back to the one I was originally picking up. But I'd say if you've enjoyed Rendezvous with Rama, right, this was when there was what appeared to be an artificial satellite coming into our planet, into our orbit, that was intercepted by some of the astronauts here. I mean, that's the kind of novel in some ways that we find in The Wanderer. We have this spacecraft / planet that's come into our orbit, and we're trying to make sense of what it is. I mean, I think Rendezvous with Rama in Arthur C. Clarke's novel, he executed it far better, in my opinion, than what we did with Fritz Leiber. But I'd say if you've enjoyed this, but you want to take a bit more of a satirical and a bit more of a light-hearted view of what that could look like, I'd say have a go at The Wanderer. I reckon you'll like it. Another novel that we've enjoyed and ranked on our Sci-Fi Shader in the past is by Fritz Leiber. This also won the Hugo Award, The Big Time. I thought this one was a really good, interesting concept, and I'd say that if you haven't read Fritz Leiber yet, these two, in my experience, are probably some of his better novels, and I'd say that if you've enjoyed The Big Time, I reckon you're going to enjoy The Wanderer as well. Now, the novel that I was originally going to pick up is E. Doc Smith's The Lensman series in Triplanetary. Now, we haven't covered this on the board, but I have read it in the last 2 years. I just failed to shoot a video review. But if you'd like to see one, drop me a note. I'm happy to revisit this one. But the reason I want to talk to E. Doc Smith is because a lot of the science that happens in The Wanderer is often attributed to what we find in the Lensman series. So you'll have some of the protagonists. There's this group of ufologists who are sort of hobbyists who are looking at spaceships and UFOs and trying to make sense of it. And they're trying to make sense of this technology. And they often say things like, oh, it must be the similar kind of technology that we found in the Lensman series by E. Doc Smith. So I thought that was a really cool homage to E. Doc Smith. So yeah, if you've liked this, I'd say you will enjoy reading The Wanderer, if nothing else, but to the respect and homage that they paid E. Doc Smith in this one. So look, that was it. We've got to rank it on our ever-growing sci-fi shed ladder. So let me flip the cameras around and see where this one lands. So back to the shed ladder ranking today's 1965 Hugo Award-winning novel by Fritz Leiber, The Wanderer. And I'm looking here at the A side, and when we look at some of the novels that we have on the outside, I mean, I did mention Rendezvous with Rama, because that was sort of an alien artifact coming into our orbit, and we investigating, trying to figure out what was, what it means, and does it bring a threat. This was sort of different. This one sort of came abruptly and caused huge destruction, where this was a sort of slow in, right? Like we had plenty of time to understand what this thing was doing before it finally did what it needed to do to avoid spoilers. But look, when I look at the A side and some of the wonderful novels that we have on the A side, and when I apply my full criteria that I've documented below, I just don't think that Fritz Leiber in The Wanderer did enough when it comes to the concept, the execution, the plot and the characters to really justify itself on the A side. So we're going to flip the board and see what the B side brings us. And this is sort of looking better now already, because some of the novels that we have on here, I mean, the top side, at the top of the B side, we have like Asimov's Foundations and Edge. We have The Gods Themselves by Asimov. So when we look at those novels, I mean, I don't think it's going to be on the top end of the B side. So maybe we can look at the bottom end, and we got N.K. Jemisin pretty much winning the wooden spoon at the moment at the bottom of the ladder. And we've got some other rather interesting novels in The Falling Woman and Enemy by Time and Timescape. Look, I would have to say that all of those are really interesting novels. So maybe it is worthwhile starting with Fritz Leiber himself and The Big Time. And is this novel going to be better or worse than The Big Time? And I've got a bit of a gap here to help us make a decision. Because when I look at The Big Time, I really enjoyed that concept, right? I thought the way that time travel worked in The Big Time was just really fascinating. A really interesting concept, but I just felt like it really failed in the execution. I just thought it was a brilliant concept, and it just had me wishing for more and wanting more. And unfortunately, it left you with a bit of a bad taste in your mouth. When we look at The Wanderer, I'd have to say that that's not my experience with it. I thought the concept was great. Like I mentioned, I thought the characters were memorable as much as they were cheesy in the main female alien protagonist. Where it sort of fell down is I felt it had way too many characters, and it made it sort of difficult to really appreciate the characters for what they were. I think, like I mentioned in my dislikes, the writing has dated, and it sort of is almost shocking at times when you're not expecting to see words like that. And I'm going to have to say that Fritz Leiber, I think, is a great writer. I think he has some wonderful ideas. I really did enjoy both The Big Time and The Wanderer. But I'm going to give The Wanderer the slight advantage and rate it just above The Big Time. And look, this is one of those things where I just always want to stress that these are all great novels, right? And I really did enjoy my read of The Wanderer, and I'd say please have a go at it. It's a really fascinating novel. It'll have you smiling at times and probably a bit shocked as well at times. But I think a novel's still worth the read. Have you read Fritz Leiber's The Wanderer? This was his second and last Hugo Award that he won, the first one being in '58. So we won't be covering Fritz Leiber on the Sci-Fi Shed Ladder, but I've got a couple more of his novels on my shelf here that I will get to in time. So we will revisit Fritz Leiber because I do enjoy his writing, and I think he's got some really interesting concepts. Where it fails sometimes is in the execution. Have you read it? Would you rank it similarly? Would you rank this one on the A side, the B side, the bottom of the ladder? Or are you astonished that this one won a Hugo Award at all? I'd love to hear from you as always. And until next time, I've been Peter. It's starting to become a little bit cooler now, so I might start shooting these videos at night again. And I'll see you next time in the shed.